All right. Merry Christmas, everyone. Hope you enjoyed yesterday. We're on the last lecture today, lecture 18, and I've prepared a little slideshow here. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Cool. So Steiner begins this lecture by referring to the so-called body of the sun, which if you look in any science textbook nowadays, the sun will be referred to as sometimes just a ball of flaming gas, which even scientifically is incorrect, but it's been hard to shake that description. There's a fourth state of matter called plasma. So when the scientific account is fully accurate, they would say, the current scientific understanding is fully accurate. They would say it's a ball of plasma. And there are all these interesting magnetic effects, sunspots, and a lot of also mysteries that astronomers, heliophysicists would admit. There's much we don't know, but we've sent these probes up to observe the sun. It's constantly now under observation by all of these various instruments, looking at different wavelengths of light and collecting all this data. But the question is the theory we're using to interpret all the data correct? Steiner would say no, because we are applying terrestrial physics to something which is not terrestrial, not made of the same kind of matter that exists here on Earth. And so Steiner, challenges us to throw off the shackles of existing theories. He says that the existing theories of the heavens, of astronomy, of cosmology are these theories are like shackles lying upon the facts, right? And so the challenge here is to really observe without our observations being sort of pre-digested for us by a theory that we're taught in grade school before we even have had a chance to actually observe for ourselves using our human senses. We're given a theory for what the sun is, and if we don't observe or question, we go through life imagining that theory were the truth. And even from a scientific point of view, if one were to be strictly scientific, one would want to question all existing theories and really make sure that they fit the observations. And in cosmology, there are so many examples of observations and data points that don't fit the existing theories, but because the theories have become so institutionally entrenched, they can't be falsified. They can't be challenged. But Steiner presents this picture rooted in a kind of new approach to natural science, which is Gartian, right? Which instead of trying to build up more and more models, more and more accurate models of phenomena, the Gartian approach would, as far as is possible, want to do away with hypothetical models to just leave us with properly arranged phenomena, right? And properly arranged phenomena, properly organized phenomena or facts would show us their own theory, right? The theory would be in the facts, perceived in the rightly or in a rightly organized series. So Steiner presents this picture of the Earth and the sun as two spheres that are thrusting into each other. And he describes earthly matter as having this positive force, this physical outward pressure, and solar matter, in quotes, as this negative force that has this kind of etheric inward suction. And he thinks that many phenomena, including comets, which I'll return to, light and heat and so on, have to be reimagined in light of this interplay between the earthly physical and the solar etheric forces. He describes the sun as a concrescence or a gathering of suctional forces and a hollowing out of space itself. So not just empty space. It's not just that the sun is hollow, which is sometimes how his view is summarized or caricatured. It's even emptier than empty space, he says, right? So it's less than empty. And he thinks that this provides an explanation for what we call gravitation, and that he doesn't think any other idea can hold the various phenomena together. I want to interject a Schellingian point of view here for a minute. I couldn't help but think of Schelling's natural philosophy while reading Steiner. Schelling wrote this text, Von der Weltzelle, in 1798 on the world soul, and at the time he was in deep dialogue with Goethe. He had already written another book on natural philosophy called Ideas for a Philosophy of Nature, which Goethe read and appreciated. But in dialogue with Goethe, Schelling was being lured away from a more idealistic point of view into a point of view on natural science, which would do justice to experience and to really move away from the idea that one could know the truth about nature purely through a kind of a priori transcendental reflection, as if, from the Kantian point of view or even the Fichtean point of view, nature would be something constructed by the activity of the eye. Schelling wanted to understand nature itself as a self-constructing process, and he drew on this idea of the world soul to do so. And he describes light and gravity in a similar way to Steiner. He says, in nature, everything strives continually forward. We must seek for the reason that this is so in a principle which, as an inexhaustible source of a positive force, constantly instigates anew and uninterruptedly maintains the movement in the world. This positive principle is the first force of nature, which he later says is light, but an invisible violence leads all appearances in the world back in an eternal circular path. We must seek for the ultimate reason that this is so in a negative force, which, by continually limiting the effects of the positive principle, leads the universal movement back to its source. This negative principle is the second force of nature, which he later identifies with gravity. These two striving forces, combined together or set in conflict, lead to the idea of an organizing principle which forms the world into a system, which he later identifies with the world soul. So he's, talking about light as positive, gravity as negative. If we were to say associate light with the sun, Steiner's telling us that the sun has this negative force. But it doesn't really matter. I think the point here is that Schelling is recognizing this original antithesis in nature between these two forces, light and gravity, and the relationship between the two gives rise to the life of our solar system. And I can't help but think of Steiner's comment, which I'll return to in a minute, about how there are these two tendencies in the movement of the planetary bodies. There's this tendency to ossify, right, which is why we can make any calculations that have predictive value at all. And then there's this other tendency toward life, which is to break free of the purely repetitive motions, which would be fully calculable, and to instead introduce this element of openness, of creativity, of life, right? And so I think Schelling is here describing something quite similar here. He also Schelling refers to light as negative gravity at one point in this essay on the world soul. So anyways, wanted to just make that connection here. I see Steiner very much carrying forward the Schellingian point of view in the philosophy of nature. So then Steiner offers some mathematical analogies for those who might want, a more mathematical approach to the ideas he's presenting. And he talks about about imaginary numbers, the imaginary number plane, and describes. He says if we were to describe the magnitude of occupied space or ponderable matter as positive A, empty physical space would then be zero, and this less than empty solar or etheric space would be negative A. And then if we bring in the imaginary numbers, he says we can use this to represent astral materiality or spirituality, better said, which is quite interesting. And is this an analogy? Is he saying that we could be actually quite precise in mathematizing these different forms, these different forms of existence, of matter, of the physical, the etheric, the astral? I'm not sure. Is it? I'm curious what you all think, because he kind of just introduces this as an aside. Then he talks about our sense of touch, and shows how this polarity between the sun and the earth is present in so many other phenomena, and that the human being is in some sense shaped by this polarization of these two forces, you could say. So he says, if we trace these things inwardly with the clear eye of the soul, then we can begin to sense the opposition of sun and earth into which we have been placed as human beings in every act of sensory perception. Everything about our human nature can be traced in such a way as to perceive the workings of the cosmos within us. Cosmic forces influence human beings at every hand. And so he describes when we touch a material surface that the pressure it exerts on us is earthly. This is an expression of the earthly force, but the counter pressure that we feel in our own finger, he says, is the force of the sun working through me. In other words, it's my etheric body counters the force of pressure from the external body, which I'm touching. Right? And so this sensation of pressure he describes as a reciprocal effect of the Earth-Sun polarity. And I think what he's inviting us to experience here is the sense of our true bodies as being cosmic in their extent, right? So just as the sun and the moon and the other planetary spheres envelope the Earth, they're not just simply located where we see the point of light in the sky. Just as they are more like spheres that envelope the Earth, extending beyond just those illuminated bodies visible to our eyes, the real human body does not stop at the skin boundary, but extends into cosmic space to encompass the entirety of the visible heavens, right? So during the day, as he rehearses for us in this final lecture, right, we stand vertically, we partake in the etheric circuit between the sun and the earth. Our head is filled with wakeful thoughts, and our willful bodies are enmeshed in the earthly metabolism. And then during the night, we lay horizontally, as if unplugging from the terrestrial solar circuit, and our metabolism goes to work within our own heads, and we have more of a enclosed etheric body that's doing this metabolic work on the head, right? So during the day, we're connected to this larger Earth solar circuit, and at night we seem to leave that circuit, while our astral and astral body and ego are quite expanded into the cosmos, with the etheric and physical bodies still laying there in bed. So then he once again tries to describe for us the lemniscatory path of the sun and the other planets, sort of following along behind it. But he points out, even if we could draw this lemniscatory path perfectly, we would still never be able to finally come up with a model of the movement of the heavenly bodies that would be true for all time. He says, no matter what mathematical curve I may devise, once it's fixed and finished, the reality will certainly escape me. My finished curve won't capture it. A planetary system tends in both directions, on one hand toward rigidity, and on the other hand toward mobile lemniscating. Right? So as I said earlier, to some extent, the planetary system is subject to this ossifying tendency. Otherwise, none of our models, the Ptolemaic, the Copernican, Kepler's, and Newton's, none of these models would be predictive at all. But there's this other tendency. And so, as Schelling was describing, it's as though gravity is this ossifying tendency is met and checked by levity, by this etheric power, which keeps the lemniscate open, fresh, alive, right? And I couldn't help but think of the corkscrew growth of plants in this context, which are mimicking that same movement, right? Now, maybe some of you have heard of the electric universe theory or plasma cosmology. I've gotten to be friends with and have studied very closely the work of a plasma physicist named Timothy Eastman. And through him, I have become quite skeptical of the Big Bang model, which is trying to explain the entire history of the universe only in terms of gravitation, as only gravitational forces were operating, right? And it leaves out, Tim Eastman would say, the effect of plasma dynamics. And if we just bracket for a minute the 96% of the universe that cosmologists currently say is made of dark stuff that we don't understand at all, and just look at that 4%, which would be all the actually visible matter in the universe that we do say we understand with normal particle physics, 99.9% of that 4% of visible matter is plasma, right? So if we bracket the introduction of really just the construct of dark matter and dark energy and stuff, if we bracket that, 99% of the matter in the universe is plasma. And plasma is also, as I said earlier, what the sun is normally described as. And that brings in these electromagnetic forces, which can be formative forces, right? And what we're looking at here is an experiment done by an astronaut on the space station using a knitting needle made of plastic. And you saw him rubbing it to create a static charge. And these are just droplets of water that begin to orbit through this electric field. And, this is not gravitation, right? This is a different phenomenon, but I couldn't help but wonder if this suctional force that Steiner's describing in the sun might have any relationship to these sorts of dynamics. I've talked to Gopi a little bit about this, and he's somewhat skeptical. But you can see just the way that the water droplets move. It's kind of tantalizingly similar to what we might want to imagine is going on with the sun and the other planetary bodies. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix. And also in Steiner's discussion of comets, there's a little statement he says in this final lecture where he's not saying that comets have no sort of material aspect, but there's something else going on, which, again, in terms of plasma cosmology, we would understand as the effect of the sun's solar wind hitting the little bit of matter and ice and stuff that's thought to be the nucleus of a comet, and creating this huge tail, which is a plasma effect, right? And so when he talks about the comet coming into and out of existence, I wonder if we could understand this in terms of a kind of plasma cosmology, or if he's talking about something else entirely. I'm trying to build bridges here, right, between more established scientific understanding and Steiner's esoteric view, though even within established science, the plasma cosmology perspective is marginalized, right? Because it's challenging the gravity-only models of the origins and organization of the universe. So Steiner closes this lecture by talking about how we need new laboratories, and we should start with empty laboratories. Throw out all the existing instruments, because he says today's instruments can only yield what's already contained in the physics textbooks. In other words, the instruments that we have nowadays, I mean, 100 years after Steiner, this is so much more the case. They're so elaborate and complicated, and in so many ways, the theory that they are trying to test is already kind of baked into the design of the instrument, such that whether it's a particle collider or the James Webb Space Telescope, it's very difficult to actually make observations with these instruments that wouldn't confirm the theory that led to their design in the first place, right? And so Steiner thinks in some ways we really need to start fresh. And this is of great benefit to spiritual science, spiritual scientists, because we don't need a huge multi-billion-dollar budget to try to out-complexify the existing instruments that big science is using. We can start with an empty room and our imaginations. And remember, Goethe's admonition that, the only truly neutral instrument in terms of not being sort of front-loaded by a theory would be the human organism itself, right? So the best instrument for observing nature is the human organism with our suite of senses that everyone acknowledges, but also imagination, inspiration, and intuition. Steiner's asked a question at the end of this lecture that he responds to, like, is this an astronomical picture you're presenting, something that can be accessed and understood and verified if one has not yet cultivated these higher organs of perception? And he says, look, no, you can't even understand the Cassini curves and the way that one goes out of space in these forms of higher mathematics without imagination. So, he's clear that we do need to cultivate these higher organs of perception, but he also says that any insights provided through spiritual scientific methods could be tested against normal physical science, and they shouldn't contradict. So there's something that goes beyond the normal physical sciences, but should still be consistent, right? So that's why I'm looking for these points of contact. He says we must have the courage to go beyond our existing judgments, to develop the forces latent within the human soul, or depths of reality will remain concealed. And then finally, he talks about the Kant-Laplace nebular hypothesis of the origins of the Earth and humanity. Nowadays, we could think in terms of the Big Bang theory as the modern contemporary equivalent of the nebular hypothesis. And Steiner is very concerned about this modern split between that severs the ethical from the physical dimension of the cosmos, where human beings are left at the end of this process of blind forces churning, producing stars and planets and so on. Human beings are left at the end of it as a kind of stranger in a strange land, aliens on our own planet, right? But Steiner points out in all of these materialistic theories, there's always the assumption of the perspective of the experimenter or the theorist, as if there's a giant demon that exists outside phenomena. He gives the example of putting drops of oil in water and then spinning that, and you can produce what looks like planetary bodies orbiting the central point. In a lot of physics textbooks nowadays that introduce the Big Bang, you'll see this guy blowing up a balloon to illustrate the expansion of space. And the Big Bang model, which again has human beings at the end of it, right? And the problem with this is it is a kind of demonology and denial, because here we are at the end of it, imagining the origin as if we were there, right? And so we're assuming the human at the beginning as a condition of the possibility of any theorization about natural phenomena, but then we're also claiming that the human only pops out at the far end of this totally meaningless explosive process. And instead of this inconsistency, we need to recognize that, the human being was there in the beginning, but the process that we are involved in is not just an explosion. It's not just driven by blind forces. There are spiritual power, spiritual beings at work, and we can participate with them in continuing to create this cosmos. I think that's the invitation. All right, let me stop my screen share and invite some dialogue. Hey, Angus, go ahead.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for that great introduction. I thought it was Monday, so I hadn't actually read the chapter. I heard it a while back. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And there's something you said that was particularly interesting, which I'll wrap into what I'm going to say when it becomes pertinent. I don't know whether the English version actually has the footnotes, but I happen to see in the German version there's a footnote to page 166, where Steiner really emphasizes the importance of these Cassini curves, and he talks about it in such a way that he talks about it as facilitating, being extremely helpful in facilitating an expansion of consciousness, which is already quite startling stuff. And if you go and read in GA 267, which doesn't seem to be translated into English, which is it's a series of lectures and notes, about 21 of them, I think, if I'm correct, which is just called soul practices or soul exercises. And also there he emphasizes, he goes into some more detail about the importance, the relevance of these Cassini curves for having, he doesn't use this term, I'm going to use it, it's like having joined up thinking all the way through the process. And he does, he in the spirit of what you were saying about it being a scientific project, something that is demonstrable, it's like even to the senses, he provides a couple of clues, and he says it's like we can talk it's like concretely about how the arrangement of how the leaves grow out of the plant stem, that they are expressions of these forces, these electromagnetic forces, which can be modeled through Cassini curves. So that was already interesting, and if anybody wants to look into it, it's like 267, and there's a bit in it, and GA 35 as well, which I believe is translated to English. And then they can also look at the footnote if it's been translated in the version that you've all been reading. Where you added that I had completely missed was when you talked about Steiner mentioning how we can use root negative A for the astral and and just negative A for the etheric, because I already shared a little bit of this with Lorenzo, but I've just done very basic models for Cassini curves where I've just been playing with the idea that he mentioned in chapter 15, which was about using variables, it's like in the Cassini curves. And it's really interesting, Lorenzo, if you can perhaps share afterwards when we looked at this together, but the feeling of magnetism or gravity, you just play around with the dots and you can see it for your own. One way of interpreting what you're seeing, so I've created two dots, Cassini curve equation through them, a variation, and when you start moving these points around, you're seeing this negative, positive, attractive force going on there, which feels really hopeful. And what you've added here is that, so I'm beginning to think, okay, how can we integrate negative A's or negative root negative A's, imaginary numbers into these modeling processes. But I feel it's like I'm really at the beginning of a path there, but already the first impressions are, this is it's like unexpected and highly visual, thoroughly based, like in an analytical model. Yeah, I think that was what I wanted to say. It feels like I wanted to say something more about the modeling that I had been done. Yeah, that was it. So one more thought. Whilst I was like doing a little bit of homework on it, I came across a guy who'd been modeling. It's like toric conic sections on toruses, and I'm just going to pull it up for myself because he was also saying like something interesting. This is a guy who, where's it gone? It's somewhere on my screen. Okay, I'll have to do it from memory and then get back if I've missed any like important details. But basically, this guy was like a far more competent mathematician, way beyond where I'm at, and he's talking about like in his many years of experience, it's like whenever he starts thinking seriously about gravity, he always seems to end up with elliptic models to go there. And basically the Cassini curve is, it's like one way of describing it in its complete sense is a model for ellipses. So my sense is, from a very superficial reading, is that there is already, so like in mathematical spheres, there's already an awareness. It's like a vague, dim awareness that there is something really potent behind ellipses. And I know Gopi talked a little bit about it in connection with cryptography when he was here. It's like in chapter 2 or 3, whenever it was. But I think if anybody else is interested in looking more deeply into that, I think ellipses and how they're understood in mathematics and how they're related to gravity might also be very interesting, because Cassini, he was actually looking to find how the Earth and the Sun, they rotated around each other. That's the original impulse for his model. Nobody seems to know actually how he came upon this, but perhaps this is purely my speculation here. Perhaps it's a little bit like Newton. So like Newton was highly esoteric. He has like a deep he had like deep readings of like ancient Egyptian ideas, that type of thing. Who knows? Perhaps Cassini was into the same type of literature there as well, but took a slightly different path.
Yeah, interesting research you're doing there, Angus. When Steiner does talk about the imaginary intensities of the astral, and using imaginary numbers to represent that, he makes this just parenthetical comment. He says it must be possible to arrive at some interpretation of imaginary numbers, since they emerge as the solution of equations. And so he wants to take the math seriously and say, well, what does this tell us about the nature of the cosmos? It's not just some kind of abstract construct, but it has real relevance. And so he's just struggling to find that.
And I'm struggling to model it. I can do it like very simply, but it's like once we get into more complicated mathematics, there I'm going to need help.
At least we have computers to model these things for us. We don't have to do it on paper.
That's right. Yeah. And that's where I started. I've been using something called GeoGebra, which is like is very useful for doing this type of work. But then you have to thoroughly understand the equations that you're working with and how you can integrate these ideas mathematically into the visualizations that you're creating.
What are you thinking, Lorenzo?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I was thinking a lot of things, and I hope to express them without making a mess. And I wanted to speak about my impressions of this lecture and how it relates to what both you, Matt, and Angus said. And one thing that has changed for me since I was reading the first lectures is some reasoning that I did regarding Hegelian logic and the difference between singularity and particularity, and how this relates to ponderable and unponderable quantities, which was something that was unclear to me when we were reading the first lectures, but then I realized that actually, yeah, thinking about unponderable quantities as relative to singularities is something that makes a lot of sense, because if we think that, and I'm using Hegelian ideas here, if we think that singularity needs two double terms to be logically treated without reducing it improperly to just a particular, and this is one of the points of Hegelian logics. This is the same that we have in mathematics when we are dealing with ratios that come from geometry, and so we have maybe two dimensions, like the diagonal of the square, and then we get these irrational quantities that are unponderable. Yeah, the number fields of the irrational numbers, the unponderable quantities, are in the same relationship as singularity, and then relating singularity to life and the possibility to change and to access acts that go beyond the potency that was already implied in the former act. And so life, evolution, all kind of makes sense now to me, thanks to this relationship between mathematics and logics. And so I was thinking that, well, regarding what you were saying, Matt, for example, I don't think that we should relate one of the existing forces, or let's say the already recognized forces of physics, like, for example, electromagnetism, to counter space as opposed to gravity. I rather think that we should first try to unify all the forces that we see, or at least that are recognized by physics. So gravity, electromagnetism, and nuclear force, strong and weak, and try to see them as all manifestations of the same force that is acting with different dynamics, probably related to shape, to form. And so maybe it's a difference of a coherency, and we could treat as people from the electric universe theory sometimes also claim to see gravity as a kind of uncoherent magnetism, and magnetism just a stronger, more coherent manifestation of the same force. While and with this, I hope to go to answer something that Angus was saying, relating to nuclear force, the fact that a force can be up to a certain distance repulsive, but under a certain distance to switch and become actually an attractive force. And this is that strange behavior that makes us think of the nuclear force as something completely separate from electromagnetism, because we have all the positive particles, I mean the protons in the nucleus that are together, but they stay together while the electron goes around. So you have to think of another force, because from their electrical charge, the protons would repel each other. But if we could model a force with a richer kind of geometry that uses different curves, I mean, the same family of curves, but that manifest different shapes, you can see, and Angus has already realized something like that in GeoGebra, is something quite easy to model. Yeah, something that is the same force is attractive, as I said, under certain distance. So once again, we might unify all forces that are thought to be different and think of them as just one force with different aspects. Then try to differentiate between a behavior that could be modeled with monopole, like our gravity, and try to see if we could model the same phenomena that we observe with a bipolar model, when the phenomena we see are actually the result of two opposing forces, one, for example, sucking or attracting force, and another repulsive force, that give you the same results, differentiating between what is acting on the singular level, the singularity of the body, from the particularity, the things that just answer to the universal, what is true for everything, without taking into account their singularity. And so from I think there is a double work to do. First, try to reconcile to one single kind of force, what physics has divided, through a richer geometry, and then divide the dead aspect from the living aspect with a polar model instead of the let's say Newtonian or Cartesian model with just one origin and no infinity. As usual, if there was something that wasn't clear, or something particular that wasn't particularly clear, please ask. I can try to express myself in a different way. Maybe we can understand each other.
I appreciate the connection to Hegel's logic. I think what you're describing also bears quite a deep resemblance, as I understand it, to Schelling's philosophy of nature, trying to understand the forces which seem distinct as physics understands them, and trace back how they originate from some unity, which is, I mean, that's what physics is attempting to do. It's just that they seek that unity in these, in like string theory, for example, looking for symmetries in rather abstract, in principle unobservable, unobservable scales. And so it's very far beyond anything that could, even by standard scientific forms of verification, be tested. But my struggle with Steiner's method is that so much of particle physics, for example, is rooted purely in these hypothetical entities. That we could say very high energy experiments kind of verify what we imagine using mathematics might be going on at these small scales, but there's a lot of inference involved there, and we're not actually observing the nuclear force. We're observing something we think corresponds to that, filtered through supercomputers and higher mathematics. So I don't know how seriously, like how much of contemporary particle physics can we take on board and still take Steiner's methodology seriously, right? That's something that I'm struggling with at present. Angus, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, a reflection before I comment on something that Lorenzo said that was interesting. Carsten, last week, I believe it was, he said a phrase that's stuck with me. It's been burning a hole in my head in a beautiful way. You can correct what I said when you get to speak, Carsten, but it was more or less the idea: duality only exists if you have not found the thought which unifies something. It's such a beautifully simple idea that's expresses really quite a profound truth, that duality is a recognition of ignorance. It could be another way of paraphrasing it. Which brings me to something that Lorenzo was saying about moving from a monopole to a bipole. And this isn't in any way a criticism, which it could be interpreted as, given what I just said about duality. But when Lorenzo was talking about finding it's like a bipole instead of a monopole, I think that's actually what we looked at in some detail when we looked at Gopi's reciprocal model there. We went into some detail there about different phenomena that are examples of it. I remember reading quite a bit around that. So I think these models, they already exist. This isn't something that needs to be invented. Instead, we're confronted by the problem that Formscape's in his recent video about how unscientific science has become, where he's really hitting the nail on the head. There's no interest in knowing these models. I mean, there is interest from our part, but if we think we're going to convince people that don't want to be convinced because their pay packet depends on it or their research budget depends on it, then we can go and whistle, can't we? But if we are interested in the truth, I believe people like Gopi and the reciprocal system that he talks about are thoroughly in line with what Lorenzo was describing.
Yeah, wish Gopi could have joined us more frequently for these conversations. Max, I see your hand.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Angus. What Angus's comment about duality existing until because you haven't found the thought that unifies immediately made me think of the Greek term logos that many are probably familiar with. The original meaning of the verb legein in Greek, I understand to have been to gather, to collect together. In fact, collect, the L-E-C-T in collect is actually logos. It's the same root as logos, just kind of arrayed in the garb of the Latin language and then in past tense. So intellect is another example of that same root. And so it's, of course, this is probably familiar knowledge to everybody, but the beginning of the Gospel of John says more or less, in the beginning was this logos. And I think of that as in some maybe ineffable way, but directly related to what Angus is saying, the logos that gathers together everything that seems disparate and separated. And of course, it's a fitting contemplation for the second day of Christmas. And also by analogy, I think of how a page of text will be like a mere multiplicity until you learn how to read. And legein, of course, also means to read in Greek. Logos is like speech or text as well. And I think that the connection is maybe clear through through the thread of drawing together into a unity, so gathering. I mostly, though, I had a question, and maybe somebody can can help me with this. This is a familiar point that Steiner makes. It has to do with the coin in the bottom of the glass. And I feel that I'm missing something because I understand all the words that he's saying, but it doesn't strike, like I don't have that moment of epiphany where I think, aha, this is what he says something about how we have to imagine not just the coin being raised, but the entire bottom of the glass being raised when the light is meant, something like that. And so I wonder if somebody can like help me see what I'm missing. This is not the first time I've heard Steiner make this point, but I feel it must be lost on me in some way.
Leaf, I had trouble hearing exactly what you were asking about. Could you just repeat it? I think the mic got a little bit garbled. Did everyone else hear it clearly? No. Well, some kind
Okay.
of.
Forgive me about that. I'm not exactly sure what might be wrong. But so my question has to do with the point that Steiner has made on not just one occasion, but several times about how the explanation that physics gives of why the coin in the bottom of the glass appears, the glass of water appears closer. And he's, I guess, I feel like I understand the words that he's saying, but I must be missing something because I don't have the sense of like epiphany that I would expect to accompany a point from Steiner like that, especially one that he keeps coming back to. That's exactly right, Lorenzo. That's it. And so I wonder if help me see what I'm missing.
Yeah, I had to read that a few times. And I mean, I guess his larger point is that this idea of light rays is introduced by a theory which he doesn't think should interfere with our observation of the phenomena, which, you know, comes out of Goethe's polemic against Newton's understanding of light. But yeah, I was having trouble following exactly the sort of experiment he was trying to depict for us there. Karsten, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, just to answer Max, I didn't get it either. I didn't understand what he was getting at, apart from what Matt is saying about light rays not be a real thing, but I'm not sure I understand why. But first, let me answer Angus about this thing about duality. There's Robert Brandon, the American philosopher, who says that a duality is something you have if you make a distinction in such a way that no relation is possible between the distinguished entities. So you could say the opposite is when you have a polarity, like Steiner is talking about this polarity between the rigid and the kind of living movement of the planets, the regularity and the irregularity, and we kind of need both to understand what's going on, and we need the relation between the regular and the irregular. So I think that's something very profound, where we're just slowly overcoming this this, you could say, the age of dualism, which has been such a strong mode of thinking since Descartes, perhaps in particular. Yeah, so that was one thing I was thinking about. Another thing is, yeah, first let me quote Whitehead just to please Matt. It actually, I think I read this in one of your papers, Matt, a quote where Whitehead, he says that in the real world, the importance of a proposition is not that it be true, but that it be interesting. And the importance of truth is that it adds to interest, which kind of struck me heavily when I read it, because I think that there's something very profound here. And I think, I mean, just like you were mentioning, Matt, this particle zoo that we have in physics, all the time we invent new particles to try to explain something. I think also trying to understand Steiner here, it's very easy to get lost in all kinds of abstractions that we can make up or details. So So there's, I mean, I really appreciate Lorenzo's immense effort to get a grip on kind of everything. And Lorenzo and me, we've been writing together, and it's really blowing my mind very often. And it's so hard to get around all these details and get it all together. But I think a very important thing is that we, even though effort is needed, cognitive effort, trying to think out how things are, I also think we have to be aware that the true realization actually comes when we stop thinking. That we have to sometimes enter into some kind of mode of silence, receptivity, you could say, and in a sense allow the ideas to come to us. So it's just that I feel when we read these things and we enter into all the details, it's very easy to get lost, just like you get lost when you try to study modern physics and try to get a grip on what that's all about. So yeah, I think, yeah, let me come back to this thing about the importance of a proposition is not that it's true. I think also we should say very often when we think about these ideas that Steiner he comes with, we want to make it scientific, but maybe we should think the other way around, that we should use these ideas to make science interesting. Because I think there's so much in science today that it simply becomes boring at some point, trying to understand all these different details that is thrown into the mix by all kinds of hypotheses that are swirling around. So what I really appreciate about Steiner's inspiration is this. It's that it's urging us to use our imagination, but to look for things, to look for perspectives that are kind of interesting, and also, of course, bring morality into the picture. Not seeing, as you were talking about, Matt, not seeing ethics and morality as something that is not relevant to our understanding, for example, of the physical universe and all the other things. So yeah, I'm a little confused because my mind is kind of, I really tried hard to follow you here, Lorenzo. So I concentrated heavily to understand what you were saying. And also, I mean, it's so difficult when we're talking about mathematics, and then you throw into the mix Hegel's logic, which is about concepts. And of course, there's some kind of intersection between our conceptual world and the world of mathematics. But I think it gets really hard to stay aligned, you could say, in this whole mixture that we've endeavored into. Yeah, I'm not sure what was I was saying here was clarifying, but there it was.
Thank you, Karsten. Just a quick note that we want to talk before we wrap up today about possibilities for what book to read next. And I can stay a little bit longer today, so we just don't want anyone to leave, unless you have to leave before we get a chance to talk about that. But I also want to finish up this conversation. I see a few hands up. And just Karsten, on Whitehead's comment about propositions, you know, for someone like Whitehead, a logician of such repute, to make a comment like that signals that, you know, he recognizes this creative dimension of the universe and of our thinking that can't be closed into any logical system. And he wrote Process and Reality before Gödel's incompleteness theorems, but he already had some indication that this was true because of how the Principia Mathematica project sort of spiraled into all these paradoxes. But he also says, he insists that philosophy is not about deduction, right? And he says deduction is a second-rate procedure. What we really want in philosophy, he says, is sheer disclosure. Sheer disclosure. And he says also philosophy is the search for premises, right? Not deduction. It's the search for the premises that would allow us to do deductions. And that these premises, we're going to have to use language to articulate them, whether it's mathematical or conceptual. They require, there's going to be an imaginative leap required in his phrase, which I, studying Steiner would take quite seriously. Like we're philosophy to advance beyond its current state is going to require the cultivation of imagination to reveal, to disclose new premises. Only once we get the premises right from through observation and a kind of phenomenology that is attuned to the display of nature, only then can we even hope to come up with models that approximate the truth through deduction. Yeah. Lorenzo, go ahead, and then Angus.
Yeah, I will be brief. Thank you, Karsten, for your kind words, and I will try to answer Max, because I too had problems with the part regarding the disk, and I think it's not clear at all. I think that some sentences are missing from the transcription by pure abduction, that kind of negative intuition. Yeah, I came to think that Steiner must be speaking about the reality of perception itself, or the point of projective geometry. That's this disk idea, and opposing to the idea of the rays deflecting, but taking what we are seeing for good. I think is the point that Steiner is making there, as in other points of the book. And so I just wanted to link this to what I was saying about that polarity. Yeah, as Karsten said, I wasn't really thinking about a duality, because on the contrary, I would like to unify all forces in physics, but then see them as a polarity might be in practical terms, relating this to having a side that takes into account the subject, and thus the perception, and thus the projective aspect of reality, appearance, let's say, and the other, the three-dimensional ontology, Euclidean ontology we believe in. So that would be the two poles, and those would be the two poles, and I think that was what Steiner was arguing with that example about the coin in the recipient. And finally, regarding what to read next, I don't know, because we reached kind of a very late point in Steiner's life with these lectures, so it's hard. And I was curious about your proposals. I don't know, maybe the occult science, because that's something that's also very technical, that kind of goes even beyond some of the things we were reading here. But who knows? It was just the first thing, that I could think about. And thank you very much for this experience that we're having in the group. It really helped me. I already knew these lectures, but this has been a lot different, a whole different experience when I managed to go much deeper, thanks to you.
I'm grateful that you were along for the ride, Lorenzo, and Outline of Occult Science was one I had in mind as well for our next group reading session. So Angus, please.
Yeah. wanted to come back again to what Carsten was saying, and actually it's also touches on the point that you talked about, Matt, when you were giving an overview of the lecture and the laboratory of the future. It's the human being that's required here. So when I first talked, I talked about the Cassini curves and where Steiner elaborates on them. And it's actually from a lecture in Bologna, 4th of April, 1911. So it might actually be translated because I can see it's in 35 as well. And this particular lecture, he's talking about the value of symbolic representations for soul exercises. And I'm thinking specifically about Carsten's question about letting go. So it's not an intellectual process. I mean, there's quite a bit to read here, but I've identified one particular section which talks very clearly to the point Carsten was making there about we can't just do this with conceptual work. So I'll just translate it on the fly here because I don't have it in English. So he's talking about this process that we've got to develop in ourselves. In this process, concepts do not work or do not function as elements of knowledge, but instead as real forces and energies, and their effect depends on the often repeated being taken hold of the concepts. So not consciously trying to manipulate them, but just letting them work as a force within themselves. And one way, connecting all the way back to our work that we did with the philosophy of freedom, I think we can understand this, is that these are real beings. And these concepts that seems dead and abstract to us, they are actually they are projections of real beings. And to move into the next stage that I believe everybody in this group is sincerely looking for, taking steps there, it's this repetitive meditative nature on these images, like the Cassini curve. It's following it through thoroughly in your imagination, moving from the whole to the lemniscate to the separated, but following it through rigorously. It's that's my understanding of what Steiner's saying here. This is the type of work that's really going to take us to the next stage. And I won't talk more about that here, but it's a very interesting topic. I think it deserves it deserves an hour's talk just on that specific subject. I'd also like to join Lorenzo and say thanks so much, Matt as he was up, but Matt and Ashton for choosing this book. I was very reticent about it in the beginning, but wow. I mean, we've been through 3 amazing rides together. Absolutely amazing. The Realism Philosophy, the Philosophy of Freedom, and then this one. Each one have been wonderful growth experiences for me. So really appreciate what you guys are doing. Thanks.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have fellowship as we try to understand these books. Yeah, I'll let Karsten go next, please.
Just to say that I appreciate this idea of concept as living forces. Also, I think it's where Steiner, he is taking idealism a step further, because in German idealism in particular, ideas are just these concepts, but dead somehow, static forms, and Steiner really takes it to the next level, with these concepts being living entities in a spiritual world. I think that's a very strong image. So I just want to add small detail about imaginary numbers, and Steiner pointing to the astral world as somehow related to imaginary numbers. But actually there are 4 number systems So they're just a little food for thought, but all our real numbers is on a line. Then if you take imaginary numbers, you have 2 dimensions, and you have complex numbers. It's a pair of numbers. If you take a pair of complex numbers, you get what is known as quaternions. And if you take a pair of quaternions, you get what is called octonions. And these work in 1, 2, 4, and 8 dimensions. And these are the only 4 number systems possible where you have addition and multiplication defined in such a way that you can have positive and negative numbers, and you can have inverses through multiplication and division. Yeah, just wanted to throw that into the mix. Food for thought.
You know, just briefly, and then Chad, I'll invite you. I'm just thinking about the idea of concepts as these real forces, distinguished from concepts which would be sort of dead, like cut roses, maybe. In contemporary physics, all this talk about matter and antimatter, and the mysteries of why there should have not been perfect symmetry, that these two would cancel out, but there's the fact that there is a physical universe suggests that there's some asymmetry here, and how that symmetry break occurs is a matter of some controversy among physicists, from what I can tell. And so there's this struggle with concepts of polarity and this original antithesis, and there's on the one hand, physics seems so close to some of at least the basic structure of the type of thoughts that Steiner is suggesting to us, but on the other hand, so far away from it, in the sense that these are pure abstractions and the ethical element is totally left out. Not to mention the idea that these forces would eventually produce a universe with life and consciousness in them. But yeah, just struggling to translate between spiritual science and physics as it currently exists remains difficult. Chad, please.
Yeah, just second everyone's praise for you and Ashton's work here. It's been an amazing journey, all 3 books. I'm looking forward to whatever Occult Science or Path No Higher Worlds. Just to right there where you're describing concepts as living beings, I think I just have to reiterate again how like Cosmos and Psyche, Richard Tarnas's work, kind of, I think it's a demonstration of how concepts like archetypes are concepts in that living essential nature of them as beings. And it's the collective psyche. The history is a manifestation of our relationship with the archetypes. It's a participatory phenomenon, and history is the scaffolding of that relationship of the archetypes living in the world. So there's a way in which I think, Rick didn't project the meanings onto history. History revealed itself archetypally, and it was a disclosure ultimately. And I think, it's simple mathematics, oppositions, conjunctions, squares. It's this simple geometry, but it's a demonstration of I think what Steiner is intimating us towards, even though Steiner's own conception or understanding of astrology may have been very limited by his time period, it seems. But anyway, I think I know I'm a broken record on this subject, but it seems like the laboratory is our work in trying to discern and see how the archetypes are manifesting in the world and in ourselves. Like that is the work, and it is a mathematical relationship ultimately. And last thing is like in Steiner's other lectures on astrology that I looked up on YouTube, he's describing mostly the signs, but like as parts of the body, right? So you go right back to the embryology aspect of what this book really began with, and we have to integrate Groff's research there, because there is this deep structure of the embryological stages of birth, and how we're all kind of filtering through it. We're all living through these different lenses, these coexystems, these complexes, and they actually describe how we see the world. Because we're living through them, we're seeing through them. So it's right there with what Steiner is describing, is this living relationship with the cosmos. So it's there to be understood, or to be continually researched and understood more fully. So I'll just leave it there. I know I've gone on too long. Thanks again, everyone, for such a rich dialogue.
Thanks, Chad. I'm kind of jealous of the warm Maui air I imagine is coming through that window in the background. Yeah, I love how Rick would compare archetypal cosmology to like the Kantian understanding of the table of categories that's in the mind, and almost like we're imprisoned within these categories and all of our experience is filtered through them, versus the idea of the categories or the archetypes actually being cosmic, and we're not imprisoned within them. Rather, we're both the human mind and the natural world are permeated by them. So that's a helpful connection to draw here. Oh, Everett, please.
Hello, everybody. This is my second meeting here with you all, and I ran across the YouTube feed two lectures ago, I think, when you guys were talking about Steiner and racism, and I found that conversation very interesting, and I appreciated what everybody had to contribute on such an important topic, profound topic. And so since then, I joined the group, and I've been in communication with Ashton and Matthew, and I look forward to participating with you all moving forward. So I'm happy to be here, and season's greetings, Merry Christmas, and all of that. I hope everybody is healthy and happy. In regards to the conversation today, I would just like to say something really briefly. And first of all, I appreciate and have gained a lot from what everybody has put forward, has offered on the topic. I think that, as everybody knows, these are challenging things to talk about, and because we are physical beings and we live in a physical world, and to a certain extent we think physical thoughts, we have to try to work our way toward these concepts that are necessarily super physical. And we go from where we are in the physical world, and we try to build a scaffold that some kind of way gets us to these concepts that really lie outside of our physical thinking, our physical world. I appreciate what you said, Karsten. I sent you a direct message, but it touched upon some of the thoughts that I was having. There is another way that we can, in combination with the work that we're doing here, gain some insight into the topics we're discussing. We can start from the other way and come back down. In other words, we are super physical beings ourselves, and we have the ability to think and function and work and inform ourselves from that realm as well. And well, what do I mean? Well, I mean, we, and I think that it was Angus who also elaborated on the fact that we can that these are things that this way of thinking scientifically can in themselves be meditative and can lead us in that way to some understanding of the topics. But I think it really does happen that we can work our way from the types of meditations that we do that really don't engage with the subject matter in the same way that we do when we're actively thinking with our physical minds. So if we start from the other direction and work our way into what Steiner is talking about, that definitely manifests itself in the physical world, we have another element, another angle that can provide light for us. I mean, as a matter of fact, it could be argued that we will gain as much, if not more, insight from that specific anthroposophical meditative approach as we can from the work that we're doing here. And then finally, I'm not sure, but I think it's an hour meeting, so it looks like I think we've gone over, and I don't want to take too much time, but I would like to say that I think both the suggestions of that we've put forward for moving forward with books, occult science, I would certainly have no objection to that, as well as I think, Max, you offered knowledge of the higher worlds, both of which would get thumbs up from me. So I'll be interested in whatever it is that we choose for our next topic. Thank you. Hey, and it's nice to be here, and nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Everett, and welcome back. We're so glad that you're joining us. Also, yeah, everyone stay tuned for an announcement regarding a pop-up presentation in the next couple months that Everett has offered to give. And if anybody else would like to give a presentation in the future, please let us know. So far, we've had one by Lorenzo, a kind of collaborative one, and Jeff as well. Yeah, that's such
Alex also gave one.
And Alex, yeah, sorry. Thanks, Matt. That's such an important point, Everett. We've talked at different times, since we've started this, about having like a meeting that's more focused on practice and like talking about our experiences with practice or different practices. So maybe something like once a month. I don't know, just an idea. And also, yeah, I just wanted to welcome Victoria and Seema. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce your name. Please feel free to weigh in on what text you might like to read next. But I also feel like occult science might be a good one to explore. But anybody else want to weigh in? Victoria?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Can I be heard?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I won't repeat, but I feel like Everett, like I'm very happy to find all of you. Yes, and I just want to make a short comment. When I read this lecture, and by hearing all of you today, it just made me think in the GA 134, and they're disregarding which path we use from the spirit to the phenomena, from the phenomena to the spirit. Like a knowledge we cannot grasp it like a necessary, also like an anthroposophical path, because it needs to be revealed to us. I mean, there are spiritual being the concept, but we cannot grasp it as our will. We need certain soul attitude and reverence and all these things that are in knowledge of the higher world. And yes, he went into detail in this lecture 134, and also there he's talked about how we can approach the knowledge of space and time and the creation of matter, which is so related with what we read in the lecture today and what we had been saying. And also, I mean, from this lecture, for me, the main idea it is like we need both paths. We need to observe the phenomena, and we need also to think and make discourse and trying to understand it, knowing that also is any curve and mathematical equation or anything is something that it will be temporal because it will be in a space, and then we cannot forget that is a certain reality, but not the full reality. And yes, and I, regarding to the book, the next reading, I mean, I just don't feel with the right now, both because I am new, but I will love to read occult science. I would love to. And I love to study the way that you guys study. I never had experienced that, like we all read the lecture and then we just talk about it. Yes, and I'm very excited to keep coming to the group and working with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, outline of occult, or sometimes it's translated esoteric science, would be wonderful. I wonder if Angus or anyone else has any recommendations about the best translation. I think there are at least two. No, okay.
There is a translation that is excellent, but it's so expensive. It's a translator from Canada. It's Chile's in London, Ontario, and it's a new translation. But it's really, really good, but it's very expensive. It's like $200, and I don't know if you guys can get it in USA. But that will be a translation that I will recommend.
Do you then know the name of the translator? You can tell me later if you want, or just, yeah, or I can look it up.
I can email you later.
Cool, thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, Ashton and I will reach out via email about the next cycle of readings and study together. Did you want to add anything, Ashton?
Nope, that's it. Just thanks so much for joining us every week, everyone, and appreciate your contribution so much. And yeah, as Angus said, it's been a great experience these last 3 cycles. So yeah, looking forward to more.
Yeah, and we continue to get emails from people who watch videos of, riddles of philosophy and philosophy of freedom and some of our pop-ups. And new people will continue to join us. They're going on the journey that we went through a year plus ago for the first time, right? So it's exciting to see the interest that's snowballing.
I would also like to encourage everybody to look at Matt's visit with John Vervaeke and Greg Enriquez, because very much in the vein of what we were struggling with today, Matt achieved something in this last video. There's another one following that really walks the line between phenomena and the intimate experience of that phenomena in his expression, by most importantly bringing in the way in which imagination is a sense organ that must reflect something in the world that is gesturally spoken through it functionally, imagination, when you compared it with the human eye and the sun. So
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right. Well, Happy New Year. Enjoy the rest of 2023, and we'll be in touch in 2024.
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone. Bye.
Appreciate you all.
Bye, everybody. Happy New Year. Almost.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.